and get started. Jess, if you want to start recording, that would be awesome. Okay. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to Waypoint Talks. My name is Christy Allen. I'm a Knowledge Translation and Implementation Coordinator with the Waypoint Research Institute, and we're really excited to have you here for our May session on Beyond Bystanders, Transforming Gender-Based and Sexual Violence Prevention Through Embedded Education with Rebecca Rappeport. We'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. The Waypoint Research Institute is located on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, which include the Odawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi nations, collectively known as the Three Fires Confederacy, the Haudenosaunee, Huron, Wendat, and Métis peoples. We acknowledge and affirm our commitment to improving relationships between nations and improving equity for Indigenous communities residing in the Central North region of Ontario. So welcome back to Waypoint Talks, or if it's your first time, welcome. Waypoint Talks is a virtual webinar series hosted by the Waypoint Research Institute, where we aim to highlight the practical implications of research projects. We also have a complimentary series around building your research toolkit, which is a virtual education series that aims to highlight best practices used in mental health research, quality improvement, and program implementation. And these events are open to all who are interested in learning about emerging research, best practices, and clinical innovation. So just some housekeeping notes. This series is hosted as a Zoom webinar, so please use the chat box and Q&A function to connect with the speaker and fellow attendees. And we will have dedicated time at the end of the presentation for questions and discussion. The recording and slides will also be available post-event on the Waypoint Research Institute website and will be emailed out sometime after the presentation. We'll also send out a post-event survey. We ask that you complete that. We appreciate your feedback, and we use that to inform future Waypoint Talks events. And there are also attendance certificates for professional development available. We'll share a bit more info on how to access those at the end of the presentation. So I'd like to introduce today's speaker. Today we have Rebecca Rappeport with us. She's a leader in sexual violence prevention and response education with over 15 years of experience in community development. As the SVPR Community Outreach and Student Support Worker at Queen's University, she has pioneered innovative, evidence-based approaches to prevention, focusing on embedding education into traditionally overlooked spaces. With a BA in International Development and a Gender Focus from the University of Guelph and an MA in International Affairs from NPSIA, where she specialized in sexual violence prevention in development contexts, Rebecca applies intersectional and anti-oppressive frameworks to her work. Her expertise spans reproductive health, survivor support, and youth advocacy, and she is committed to transforming prevention education to create lasting cultural and systemic change. So over to you, Rebecca.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to try and share my screen, which is going to be the big hurdle. Can everyone see that okay? And I'm looking at Elnaz. That's great. And Elnaz, who is why I'm kind of here, is going to be staying on screen because I had a big fear of just talking into the void of not knowing who's there. And so I'm able to see at least if Elnaz is like, great, this makes sense, or if not. And I look forward to hearing everyone's questions at the end. Thanks for that. That was a really nice introduction. Before we begin, I just wanted to do a note around content and care because I'm going to be talking about sexual violence and intimate partner violence. And I'm not going to go into a lot of details, but I am going to share some stories, as this is a little bit about storytelling. And I am going to share some very small statistics. And, you know, these topics, as I do a lot of workshops on this. And often I'm asked, like, how do we create more safe spaces like this to have these discussions? And what I always say is this isn't a safe space. We can't talk about sexual and gender-based violence safely because it isn't safe for most people if we're going to talk about it in real ways. But that doesn't mean I want anyone harmed through this. So people aren't on screen, you're unmuted, you can do what you need to take care of yourself. But I just really want to encourage you to do that. The other piece is like, it's okay to have emotions come up. And often the places where we learn the most or stretch ourselves are often uncomfortable. But again, I don't want anyone harmed in it. So just a note on that. And this is part of, I've been working with LNAS as my role in this office just to support their work, which is going to come at the end of the presentation. But is part of my IPV story, a campaign using storytelling and social media to increase awareness around research and personal stories. So I will continue on. So why do I do this work? It's interesting working in the realm of sexual and gender-based violence. When you do this work or you tell someone and you meet someone and they ask you what you do, it's often met with a lot of shock or an overwhelmed feeling. I was talking with an oncologist who does really serious work, and he looked at me once going, I can't believe the work you do. And I'm like, I can't believe the work that you do of having to hold this space. So it is an interesting thing. Often I think people assume that you come here because of something really, really terrible happened to you. And that's true for a lot of people that are in this space and working in this area and in the community is that. And that's true and not true of me. It's a bit different. For me, I'm an only child of a psychologist and a therapist who was brought up Christian, Jewish, and Buddhist. And so that might just tell you a lot to begin with in terms of how I work in the world. And in grade 9, I remember even back, so I've been doing this work for a very long time, but if we go back to grade 9, I advocated in my high school for better, I talked to the faculty for better sexual health education because I could see that it was severely lacking. So I've been doing this work. I don't think they changed anything. I'll say that. But I've been doing this work trying to advocate for a very long time. And I think the reason is when I looked at the injustices in the world and I looked at a lot of the problems, all of the intersections felt like they were very connected to gender-based violence and sexual violence. And you know, studying international development and doing my master's in that field, I always brought it back to that. So that's partly why I do that work. The other part is I didn't come here because of something big that happened to me. I came here because of so many small things and the contortions I've done emotionally through my life to be able to justify or move on or still engage with people where that hurt has occurred. And so with that, I've also seen through so many people through my work, but also friends, the contortions and the pain and mostly the shame, the deep shame that survivors live with internally of what was done to them as children or as teenagers, as adults. And it intersects so many parts of their lives. So, you know, we understand now that sexual and gender-based violence, I mean, we, and I say generally some people and advocate for that, it's an epidemic. And it was really kind of understood 10, 15 years ago as starting to be like, especially on post-secondary institutions, as an epidemic. But we treat it like it's inevitable. So we're calling it a crisis, but we're treating like it's always going to be there. And this is just something we have to put up with. Unless there's a scandal or a headline, and then we all get really excited and something has to be done. And then it goes back to being this kind of big burden that some people have to carry. And we don't really understand the huge ramifications that it has on all people. So I don't think we're ever going to end sexual and gender-based violence completely, but I think we can be doing a lot more and doing a lot better than what we're doing now. And so that's why I do this work. And also so I also put up that picture. One of them is when I was in university in my last year. And then when I was young, because it's kind of being part of it, like you have to bring yourself into this. And I think LNAS with the work that they're doing is a lot. I'll talk about my work, but I bring myself into it because it's really hard to separate yourself. And I always do a land acknowledgement, and I'll talk about my process. For this presentation, I'm going to talk for not as long as it says. I'm going to talk for a shorter amount of time, and then we'll have time for questions. So I'm going to go over kind of this program I've developed. But whenever I do this program or whenever I do a lecture, I always start with a land acknowledgement. And so I want to acknowledge that we're on the land of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe. That's where I'm coming from today. And I think it's really important because um, we have to look at sexual and gender-based violence in the structures and systems that it exists in and what have been built and continued. And we can really see that with colonialism. And we can really see that with the continued disproportionate harm that occurs for Indigenous women, girls, and two-spirited people. Um, and so we really have to, and this is where I start, often my land acknowledgements are around 15 minutes and a real discussion with students around what does it mean to understand these structures and systems that occurred. And when we talk about sexual and gender-based violence, I often ask the question, well, why do people commit it in the beginning? Why does it exist? We talk about it often as someone losing control or as an evil, demented person. But when the studies that are not huge, but that have been done, that have looked at perpetration, show that it's about power and control over someone through an area. There's always an aspect of disdain for them through dehumanization. So it's power and control through a sexual act enabled through the dehumanization. And when we look at colonialism at its core, what it was about when nations go to another place and claim the land and the resources and enslave people, is it's about power and control of land, people, and resources enabled through the dehumanization of a whole group of people. And so it's really, really connected, and we can see that today. And so I make those connections because it enables us to set up the conversation and acknowledge really what still occurs in Canada in really horrendous kind of numbers towards Indigenous people, but also how we can look at sexual violence through systems and structures. I'll share one quote because it's better than anything I could say. And it's from the Native Women's Association of Canada that says, colonialism is a system that perpetuates the ideas that settlers are superior to and have the right to take from and rule over Indigenous people. Because Indigenous women were seen as unhuman, sexual violence against them became normal and was never punished. This colonial hierarchy persists today and influences how Canada's government's laws and policies operate. So with that, I want to acknowledge on this land, and I try to do my work to really keep on learning and embedding this in the work. I always ask at this point if there are any questions, but I can't do that. We'll all have to wait till the end. If there's any questions, wait till the end. So to set up what this is when we're talking about intimate partner violence and sexual violence, we can see that, and this quote by Dr. Angela Davis, I think really resonates for me. I am no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I'm changing the things I cannot accept. And so if we take sexual and gender-based violence as inevitable, is that this is what's occurring. And I talk to and I do workshops with, hundreds and hundreds of undergraduate and graduate students. And it is seen as inevitable often. It is seen, it changes in terms of how it's viewed, but it is seen as inevitable. And we've seen there's been, doing this work around prevention and education and support is still fairly new. As I tell students, the year I was born was the first year it was illegal to rape your spouse in Canada. Now, that might age me, but it also shows how recent changes have been. And changes in awareness are really, really important. Changes in policies, like not being able to legally rape your spouse, are really important. Having policies in universities, changes in, laws. This is all really important. But, and again, it's, how we study and how we interview changes, and there's a lot of different things. We have seen that the rates of sexual violence haven't really decreased. So it's one of the only violent crimes that's not decreasing in Canada. There was over 93,000, and I'm sure the number is higher, Canadians reported intimate partner violence in 2016. Change is possible, how we do this, but it's not possible if we keep on doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different outcome. So this is, and I won't go through, maybe I'll go through a couple more stats, but there are stats that have come out in the studies that have been quite good in Canada. And this is what I also give to the students because I want it to resonate for here is we know that 11% of women students experience a sexual assault in a post-secondary setting in the previous year. And that's from StatsCan in 2019. 30% of all women age 15 and older have been sexually assaulted outside of an intimate partner relationship, at least since the age of 15. We know that fewer than 6% of sexual assaults are reported to police, and hardly of those even end up in the courts or into conviction. So we also know that for Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirited people, the stats are a lot higher. For racialized women, for women with disabilities, for 2S LGBTQ+, often 6 times the rate of other folks. For trans folks, it's extremely high. So we can see all these other intersections and power structures of who is experiencing this violence. And it's not just experiencing the higher rates, but also who's believed after and who is supported. And so it remains a really critical issue. And we have started, and there's across many universities, and it's so important, there's been so much work around bringing awareness and doing consent weeks and having programs like Bystander, which is now, has been, and I'll talk a little bit more about it, but it is across many universities. But we still struggle with how to engage the people who maybe don't care, don't believe that it's going on, don't believe that it's a problem, or don't believe that it's their problem. Often the people, if I'm running a workshop that's on offer, it's going to be the people that are fully engaged, like know a lot already, or it's going to be sometimes someone who's been injured and is looking for support. But it's going to be very, very few people. And so how do we engage the rest of the people that are already overloaded with a ton of other extracurriculars and opportunities? And so that's the question that I came to when I came to Queen's University, which was 3 years ago. And I forgot to mention, but there was a nice introduction about my education, but I also have worked in women's reproductive health care and around disabilities and at the Sexual Assault Center and doing studies. So I've been doing this work for a very long time. But this is the question I got is, I can run this great workshop. I can bring in a wonderful speaker to share experiences. I can offer free sandwiches. And maybe the 8 people that come will really like it. But that doesn't feel like it's having the impact that I would like. So this is the problem. What do we do about it? I really like learning. So I got to, I'm at a post-secondary institution, which is the best, being able to work there, and you get to learn from other brilliant people who know a lot more than you. And so while here, I started hearing about wicked problems from people way, not in my field at all. And it's starting to be something that we talk a lot more in the zeitgeist. It's really taken off in tech, in a lot of big industries, and how we're looking at, it's been around since the term was coined in 1973 by Riddle and Weber. So a wicked problem is this giant, huge, complex, systemic problem that is so deeply embedded in institutions and relationships and culture and politics. And there's no single solution for it. There's no clear stopping point. So it's not like it will be solved and then, great, we figured that one out. It continues on, and there's often competing values, political pressures. This is often being framed around water supply or climate change, or migration, like these sorts of a lot of environmental issues of going, we have this big problem. We can't solve, climate change from just figuring out a different recycling system. It's going to take a lot of different people from different areas to fix it. And it won't be fixed. It'll just be get better, or we can make it worse. And so for me, this is sexual violence. It's tied in with every other form. It's tied into how we view it in healthcare, in the justice system, how we have workplaces and sexual harassment, our media. It's tied in every time we see a natural disaster, sexual violence goes up. We can see in mass migrations problems, in war, It's used always in war as an act of war to control people. It's in all of these structures, as well as intimate partner violence. And so the solutions also have to live in all those structures. And we have to have experts from all those different areas to say, wait, we're missing this part here. And so in terms of wicked problems and gender-based violence, it's been slightly framed. There's been a couple people who framed gender-based violence as a wicked problem. I'm not going to say no one's done it as sexual violence, but very few people. So we get to be cutting edge here and be like, what does it mean to now frame this as a wicked problem? What will that open up? So it really, this is, and especially I don't think it's being done around embedding it in education, which is what I'm going to talk about. So we're going to first start by saying there's not a checklist, right? And that this is a really messy, complex problem that has tons of different areas. So what we need to solve it is new mindsets and new tools. You know, wicked problems are often thought to have really deep roots, and those are in patriarchy and in colonialism and economic injustice. But this is why we can embed it in education and looking at these areas. And what I hope to do by embedding it in different faculties and different classes is how can we equip students and professionals from these different fields who haven't considered sexual or gender-based violence or intimate partner violence a problem that they could solve in their future, but how could they use the tools that they're learning to address this big, huge problem that is worldwide, but is also localized right here? And so framing that really, really opened up how we can start presenting it. And in terms of, and I'll talk a little bit about bystander, but it gave people a role in it, like a real role. And for certain people, that can feel really important. So I put a quote in here too, is that, you know, the feedback I get from students, and I'll talk about the actual feedback I get, but this seems to really resonate when I started piloting this 2 and a bit years ago. So I always do this. I have to take a sip. I can't talk for this long. So why does traditional prevention fall short? By traditional prevention, I'm talking about there's bystander education. There's been different forms of education in some work. Some were working with primarily women, and there's been a lot of success, but it's a very, very in-depth program where you're essentially just teaching women, essentially, this is not fully, but to trust their gut and be able to get out of situations. But it's very, very in-depth, and it's just working with potential victims. There's been areas that have worked with, just men as potential perpetrators. And then bystander came out, which is treating everyone as a community. And it's trying to go past the idea of what happens if you're a bystander, you're like, this isn't my problem, and teaching people how to become active bystanders, where they are able to support if they see something or intervene or provide support after or pull someone else in for support. And so there's been a lot of good studies in showing the kind of standard bystander program has a big influence on helping people change their mindset. But what studies haven't shown, and again, it can be really complicated in how do we study this, and we can't have control groups and all of these things, is does that mindset change actually turn into real change in terms of actually decreasing sexual violence perpetration or victimization? And so that hasn't been shown yet. So taking that model, I was like, how can we make this deeper? How can we relate it that it's not just that you happen to be there or because you're a young person, one of the biggest factors of experiencing sexual and gender-based violence is being between the ages of 15 and 24 in Canada. So it really is for this age group. So instead of just that you're in this culture, what if you have more of a role? And what people like to learn about, and I also just didn't want to add another, here's a checklist, here's this standard thing, is you care about learning this one thing, which might be, kinesiology, and you want to become an athletic director or, or an engineer, or in medicine, or you want to run a business, or an English major. You care about, you're studying that thing because you really want to do that, or you really want to learn about that. And that way, how can we really embed it in there, in that it connects with what you're learning? And then I shared the New Yorker joke on this slide. And for anyone, New Yorker jokes are just great, but the dogs are saying, just to be inclusive, it's always sit, stay, heal, never think, innovate, be yourself. So I'm taking this as my invitation to be like, okay, how do I make this myself? How do we innovate? How do we work together? And I started with a friend, which is always the case, a professor who was like, yeah, how do we put this in? And it was in international development. That made a lot of sense. And I started in another class, which was robotics and technology engineering in a design class in a second year, which made no sense to anyone. But I was asked to do a 20-minute presentation on, not doing kind of sexist language and support and good communication. And I said, no, I'd rather take up two-hour slots and do something that hasn't ever been done before and try it out. And I want you to assign a grade. And luckily, this professor, shout out to Josh Marshall, was like, okay, let's do it. And so I was able to work kind of simultaneously with the two professors of how do we actually put it into very different classes? And so with part of this, like we've seen that if we can offer, and we have great programs here at Queen's, but if students have the choice whether to attend, they rarely do. A study in the UK said like usually it's only 6% of students complete any bystander training. It's very, very low. And there's this incredible work, but people aren't going there. And so, doing something, having something available doesn't mean we're doing enough. And I believe, and what I'm learning more about is that transformational educational experiences, right? It's when we connect, and this, Al-Naz's work is when we connect emotionally to it. It is that slight spot of discomfort, but that slight spot of also, oh, this is something I haven't thought about, or that challenges me, or that I emotionally connect to. And so I can't talk about it separately from myself. That would be really disingenuous in front of the students. And so I'm able to really talk about these things in a real way. And what I'm really doing too is I'm coming to them, and I'll talk a little bit about how we design the systems and work through it. But we work together to be like, let's solve this. Like, we don't know. This hasn't been invented yet. What can you do? So, workshops, traditionally, we can teach concepts, but then we don't often see how people are related to themselves in the violence. And, we need more models that invite critical thinking and ownership. So we've seen that, raising awareness is important, but that it doesn't often lead to action. And that programs are often designed for compliance goals rather than in changing systems. So this is the problem, right? We have this awareness doesn't always lead to action. It's very important. It's foundational. And I always start with that. Developing policy doesn't always lead to culture change, but also very important. And having a learning outcome doesn't always lead to a system change, right? It doesn't lead to transformation. Who are these messages getting to? And that passive learning doesn't mean they're going to get engagement. So this was the issue. So what did we do? So the idea was to put this education into classrooms. And I believe it can fit into any area of study. It won't fit into every classroom. If a classroom is on, clock design of, a really technical, I don't know if they have clock design, but, something really technical about something, this might not fit in, but it can fit into any area if we figure out the right class. So I work directly with professors, and this is how it's really gotten from professor to professor, and now it's kind of expanding more. And we look at it together. So every session, and right now it's done as a one-off session, but looking at how we can scale it, how we can tie it into learning and attending other workshops, maybe in first year. But We look at what the students are learning and how does it tie in. Often in design classes, when they're already doing group work, when it's around communication or strategy, and we frame it within what they're learning. So the point isn't to cover every angle of sexual or gender-based violence or intimate partner violence, but it's to frame it as this wicked problem and to tackle it so that they can tackle it from their own lens and they can also localize it. So let's see, we've taken the strengths of bystander and made it in real world discussions. So what looks different is it's not a guest speaker, but it really connects to what they're learning. And it's all trauma informed. Students can opt out. There is always a grade associated with being there. And I'll talk a little bit more of what it really looks like. This quote from the student, team discussions on solutions allowed us to focus on the root problems and feasible solutions. So this is part of it. And I'm sharing a longer quote here, but I'll read it out loud. I especially appreciate the speaker's emotion. I find many people who speak on this topic tend to try to keep it separate from personal experiences. But the interaction was highly beneficial. The facts were appreciated from an engineering perspective to depict a picture of where we stand. The visuals inspired thought. I thoroughly appreciated and benefited from this workshop. I hope positive changes aren't as far away as bureaucracy would dictate. Which is, I collect both qualitative and quantitative surveys, but part of it is that prevention has to be personal, it has to make it relevant, and it relates to what students are studying. And that it becomes a space for reflection and creativity, not just compliance. So what does it actually look like? I collaborate with, it's usually second or third year. It hasn't worked that well for first year. And we're incentivizing and figuring out other ways to engage first year students where it's very much needed. But we work with a professor to identify how it relates to the content. We then assign pre-readings that are very short and that most of them won't do, but that can give some context to the issue and what we're discussing. And as well as if the teacher has something that they're wanting to add in more for that week, that makes sense, we work on that together. I then adapt the materials and knowledge that I'm going to be sharing to that class. So if it was in a kinesiology class where people are wanting to work something around athletics, maybe going into medicine, we give a lot of examples around there of the issue of sexual or intimate partner violence within athletic settings, which has had historically big problems. We look at teams and how they function. We look at healthcare outcomes. We look at physio, right? We're looking at that. In engineering and robotics technology, we might look at issues that have arisen in technology with technology facilitated sexual violence, or how now tracking devices are being used for stalking, unintended consequences that have come out, or any of these pieces. If it's in an English class, we talked about content warnings. We talked about problematic authors that were very, very popular and we liked their work, but now have come out and we see like in relation to today are extremely problematic. Do we still take their work? So you can fit it, in medicine, the same thing. You can fit it in, and I do that kind of work for my lecture. I then deliver a 30 to 50-minute session, and it really kind of frames sexual and gender-based violence and intimate partner violence as a complex systemic issue tied to their professional future. Students it has to be in a class where they're able to brainstorm together in teams, and going around and spending time where we create a kind of case study, which is usually located, it can change a bit, but that is here. So it's in their lived experience at Queen's right now or in Kingston, is localized so that they also are able to understand the issue here, but using it to not just be like, this is a problem somewhere else. And it really helps situate this global problem, but locally, and to understand the various things that contribute, even in the systems and structures and discrimination and racism And I share stories. I share stories of a catcalling experience. I share stories of being called hysterical in a medical profession when someone overdosed me, a doctor, not like a random person, but a doctor. And I share experiences that relate to here and now. We discuss in real ways, how students or young people now are using the language of body count and where does that come from and what does it mean? And how does that lead to, normalizing sexual and gender-based violence? So we move through stages of design thinking. We use it as a design thinking course, which again, I am borrowing from other fields, but is really, really useful and is being used across a lot of different disciplines now, which in design thinking, the first step is empathy. It's having someone being able to give you the context and for you to feel something. So in design thinking, when we're looking at these tech companies too, or whatever they're doing, it's empathy. And then it's ideation. And then it could be prototyping, right? Like what's actually going to work? What's actually doable? And so students are creating things. And what's the most exciting is I think they're coming up with things that haven't been done and should be done and that I want to invest in, or at least I should be getting dividends or something. But, they're doing things that are like thrilling and they're excited about it. And I'm like, this should happen. So that gets to be this pitch idea. And I see continually in the feedback, there's a couple things that really resonate with students. And that time to spend together and do that ideation and narrow it down and develop different frameworks are really powerful. So currently it's kind of a one-off, but it also gets students to other things, and I'm looking at how to scale it, and there's only one of me, and there was a bunch of other, still is a bunch of other things that I do in this position at Queen's. But so we're figuring out how to place this, and it's just shown to be really, really successful with amazing feedback. In those first 2 sessions, I did surveys by hand and then pulled it all together and was kind of amazed. So the work is emotional, but it's also academic. And so we can see it resonate, and students aren't asked to solve the whole problem. It's not to solve the whole problem. They're challenged to understand how their field, their expertise, what they care about of doing in the world, can lead to change. I have students that are in like mining and excavation and engineering, and that mining is a huge issue in terms of sexual violence. And we've seen historically how this is. So, students are coming up with ideas about that, or even safety measures in labs that I hadn't thought of, and understanding these different structures. So it really seems, some of the ideas that students have come up for is like a lot of people in different ways have used, and they understand the context of what they need more than I do either. So using, developing an AI tool where students are able to put in when they're at university, the issue they're facing, problem that's happened, that then takes them to the localized support, as opposed to trying to figure out which service is best for them. They will then be like, I'm struggling in this way. And it tells you, oh, this is available at Queen's, this isn't. Because one of the biggest things we're seeing with these workshops is how much students are like, I didn't know these supports were available, which is one of the goals. But to have that available, or to have wearable technology that, students really understand at the end of it, that a lot of people don't want to go to the police and don't go to the police. And a lot of the times people are hurt by people they know and maybe people they love or like. And so often they just need a reason to get out. So wearable jewelry or something that would hook up to your phone, and you would be able to then message your friends of where you are and that you need an interruption or a pretend phone call. There's also different ways. We have blue lights at Queen's, and different ways students have thought about doing this. Also, examining how we have rape kits and how going through hospitals and how tedious and painful and long that experience can be, and can we improve that? How can we make that better? Or if there's anonymous, can we have home kits for care packages anonymously for people after sexual violence that could help in terms of evidence collection, but also in terms of what they're needing in terms of support. And so they're thinking creatively and coming up with ideas that I would never have thought of. And sometimes it's like the goosebumps that you feel in it, and they feel it too because they are like, yeah, this is a good idea. And it needs to be prototyped and we need to figure it out and all those pieces, but it lends to that kind of continued development. So what we've achieved, I've been in this role for about 3 years now, and started it in winter 2023 and in 2 classes. And so roughly, and I am not a statistician, my expertise is not in collecting data, but I understood from the beginning that if we were to understand if this was having an impact, we needed to collect data and anonymously. And so approximately, 3,200 students now have gone through this specific kind of embedded, which I'm calling innovated program. It's been in 4 different faculties, and it's 7 different courses, more now, I think. And next year looking for more. So we can see even in the winter of 2024, we had 1,200 students be in one of these workshops. And again, all students can opt out. And there's like a different assignment that's given and things. And we had a 94.9% survey completion, which is, if you like data, amazing. And so we were able to see that 83.6% of participants felt, really that they were engaged in the workshop. 71.8% of participants felt much more knowledgeable about the available resources. That's all the things that, like, if you experience this or a friend does, what's available at Queen's? What policies do we have? What educational programs? And 73.9% reported a better understanding of the impact and intersections of sexual violence. And they also do qualitative data, where this is where I'm getting all of those quotes from. We can also see, so, some of these classrooms are 70 to 80% men. And it's not something that naturally fits. But at the end, there's different ways that it's been engaging, and seeing the impact. I've had some amazing experiences where there was one table of guys and they were being really quiet, and I wasn't sure how well it was going, and there was a couple snarky comments, but then one of them afterwards came up to me and said, just because we weren't speaking didn't mean I wasn't listening. I just never had thought about those things in that way. Like, thank you. And another time I came back an hour later after giving a presentation, and there were 2 guys sitting and talking about their ideas of how they could actually develop it, still just engaging in it. And I'll say in the first, what I hear consistently from women, especially in these fields, that there are more men, but in a lot of the time, that hearing their peers, especially for people who've experienced intimate partner violence or sexual violence, which is a reality that they live in, is that hearing their peers take it seriously and engage with it and understand it's such a big problem and try to come up with the solutions feels like a new way of belonging, a new way of connection that is important, and making them feel less alone. And so there's been some really powerful team building and understanding with that. I'm almost coming to the end of this, and we can answer some questions, but what students have, what they've said a lot in the qualitative data, and just in this last semester, I have done pre and post workshop surveys with a extremely high return rate too, and I got some really good data. I'm still trying to figure out how to analyze it, and just haven't had time, but hopefully this summer to look at it a little bit more. But in terms of when I've asked students, one of the questions I asked was, what was most impactful about this workshop? And then what would you like to learn more about? And a lot of it is about that they were able to create something. They were able to be part of something in a meaningful way. Um, Another person said contributing with peers to come up with a plan was very helpful, as well as learning more from the speaker about things on sexual violence I didn't know before. Um, I've taken other workshops, but for the first time, I felt part of the solution. And like talking about the solution, another one is I think the last brainstorming ideas about realistic proposals was really helpful in thinking about how these issues relate to our daily lives. So they're able to bring in their lived experience, what they're hoping to become experts in, and then share them with the group in these kind of elevator pitches. And so you're able to hear all of these different ideas as well. Another quote is the idea generation, since it challenged us to think of solutions and put ourselves in someone else's shoes. And so, yeah, in 2025, I've done these pre and post, first time being able to do these surveys. And we saw like a 66.8% increase in confidence in accessing support services, 51.3% increase in knowing where to find support, 34.8% increase in awareness of sexual violence as a serious issue, and 19.1% feeling empowered to develop solutions. So all of that feels really great. So there's, a big increase in awareness. There's a drop in uncertainty of what services are available. And yeah, it feels, especially the qualitative responses feel really, really great. So where do we go from here? This is still fairly new and it's really exciting, and it's exciting to have more people engaged and get expertise from other folks around all of this, because it really is interdisciplinary. Like, this isn't an isolated work. It's, in this idea generation, in this wicked problem, there has to be someone who's able to frame the problem. And then you need to pull in all of these different people to say, well, how are we going to do better responses for survivors? So part of it is that we're redistributing the problem. Is that traditionally there's just been a lot of people like me going, this is a problem, listen, do something. That's generally been what our solution is. And instead, let's redistribute it, that it rests on people in all of these different fields. And let's embed it to where we're able to engage more people. So the model doesn't work because it's like trendy, students don't care. And they're like, I often walk in and it's, blank stares and why are you here? And by the end that changes. And part of this is, I think it's because I tell stories in it. I relate it to my life and we talk in an open way. And that becomes, this work is emotional and it is personal. And so, we've spent a lot of time, and we still have to teach students and people how to name the violence. And now I think we have this opportunity to engage in a deeper way that doesn't take them out of their studies, that actually helps them learn better. Because there's so many classes now in university that is about how do you speak to someone else not in your field, right? How do you communicate as a team? How do you understand or address this problem? And so one of the biggest lessons is I come in and say, you're going to be talking to people like me who know nothing about what you do, have no expertise in that. But I know this thing, and I think you can help me solve it. So that's really helpful too, is that we don't have to all be experts in sexual or gender-based violence or intimate partner violence, but we have to start engaging with other people. Too often we measure success if whether policies were followed, not if harm was prevented. And so I think it's not just about doing more, it's about reframing the problem, right? It's not just a legal issue or a personal failure or a problem between two people or an evil, demented act where evil, demented people are only doing it. And I talk about that because often it's somebody people we like or we know or who are great in the community. But it's this bigger structural systemic problem where we can apply design thinking And there's some methods to do that. And we redistribute the problem. And we don't ask survivors just to carry it. And I think this is going to improve support and belief in survivors. And it can support how the systems, which often fail survivors, work and function, but also how we can start working better in terms of education and prevention. Yeah, so we stop just reacting, which is, again, kind of, this is a big epidemic, there's a big problem, but we think it's inevitable, so we'll just keep going until there's a scandal, or there's, something happens and we all get very upset. We stop reacting and we start just building into what we want to do. So reframe the problem, redistribute the responsibility, and then work with really, really smart, amazing professors in other ways to get this education into for people aligned with what they care about, with what they work, that's actually going to help them in their degree and meet the requirements of what they have to do. And yeah, hopefully that's it. So I think I've talked for my watch is dead for a while, and I appreciate however many of you are out there that have still stayed with it. And yeah, I'm happy if there's any questions, and I can stop sharing my slides.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. That was fantastic. And yes, there's been some great questions coming in. So please share more in the chat or the Q&A box if you'd like, but we'll start with the ones that are already here. So we're starting with a question. Kate is wondering if you can walk through the consultation process with interested faculty. She's curious to learn more about how you tailor your content.
The consultation process is me going, hey, I want to do this with you. It's been really about that relational aspect. So again, it helped with that I started with 2 classes and then collected all that data. So I was able to say, look, we've done it in these 2 very distinct fields, and we are seeing that, we had, I don't know, 95, 96% return rate on these surveys in the first 2 classes. And we're able to show 89% of people were relating it to what they were learning. Like, that was a big piece, is that the statistics really show, the surveys really show that people are, it's not just this add-on, that they see it as connected to what they're learning and what a big impact it had and all of the qualitative stuff. So it spread a little bit by word of mouth that way. And then I would talk to someone about what I'm doing and, briefly in all the university things, and they'd say, that sounds great. And I'd say, do you want to try it out? Like, let's figure this out together. It really is that problem solving. So it looks a little bit different now. It's, I'm finishing up 2 years, but I'm starting to figure out how to grow it while being sustainable and doing all the other education and outreach and support that I do, but in ways to formalize it a little bit more. I hope that answers it.
Amazing, thank you. So the next question is about upper year classes and first year students. So you said this works best in upper year classes, but that you're trying to engage with first year students. So what would this look like in a first year class?
Well, so students at Queen's, first of all, through amazing, there is it takes all of us online training that they do before they come into residence, which is phenomenal. Not all universities have this, but students at Queen's do. And then we have, with a shared office in student affairs, a program on active bystander intervention, and as well as other kind of gender-based violence workshops that are peer-led. So we take students and train them to become peer facilitators. And so I'm really working at how do we get these incentivized first-year students to attend one of those workshops, to be able to get some of that information, and you can get a bonus mark in a class. So working at that way. And why I don't think it works as well as in first year is that they don't have enough knowledge yet of what they're learning to apply it. So I can go in and do a guest lecture, which could be great, but I wouldn't be able to ask them to reflect on the things that they're learning because they don't yet have any of that expertise. And then I think it would be more interesting when you're getting into higher levels or graduate work to actually start prototyping. or to kind of do reverse design thinking of things that have been developed but had unforeseen consequences in terms of this. But I believe that by, second year, third year, fourth year is all a really great time to be doing that. And I'm thinking and working with how to scale it. So how you could have it potentially in first year, second year, third year, fourth year, and get this kind of repeat if there was, 14 other people of me here.
Awesome. Thank you. So there's another question about how you initially connect with professors. Do you have a recruiting strategy or do you use existing connections, that sort of thing?
Um, no, I use existing connections. And then I've had, I mean, there's been a lot of uptake in engineering, and shout out to Smith Engineering, is that they've really been so supportive and seen the impact and how well it aligns with a lot of their goals. So there were some people at higher levels that are saying this fits, this is amazing, and approaching other professors for me, and professors talking to other professors. And so there's been a lot of that. I also, thanks to the Center for Teaching and Learning at Queen's, I presented last year at their Showcase of Learning, and a lot of people, about what we had done. And I presented with two other professors in a very, very brief 10-minute kind of, this is what we've done. And so other people knew me from there. So it's felt in this very natural way. What I will say is these questions, and I work in the admin side of the university. There is often, and there's a lot of papers on it, a huge divide between administration and faculty in post-secondary institutions. And this, the admin side is really, tasked with a lot of the taking care of students. And the faculty is around education. So sexual violence and preventing it and supporting students falls on us. And they're on education. But I'm in this role of education for this issue. So I have to work with faculty. It's where I'm going to get students. So, I can offer as many free sandwiches and things, but that's only going to get the people who really care about it. So yeah, it's the recruiting strategy is organic. And there was a professor, I wonder if he's on here, probably not, but I played basketball with him once on a totally unrelated thing, and then he never remembered my name. And I think I have not yet gone into his geography class, but I was like, I think you owe me. So that's not really my strategy overall, but it's been very organic and then people have seen the impact of the work and have heard about it. And so that's exciting.
Great, thank you. And as a follow-up to this one, someone is asking if you can just confirm which four faculties you are already working with on this.
Yeah, let me not get this wrong. So engineering, and then arts and science, and then health sciences and health studies. I believe I got that correct. So I've done it in kinesiology classes, but also in kind of pre-medical classes, a lot of engineering classes. And now we're looking at a lot of different faculties, and then some art sci with development studies. But my goal is always to go in the places that you wouldn't, I don't want to go into a gender studies class necessarily. They're already looking at this, right? And so it's going into the places where it doesn't feel like it might be the most natural fit.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you're saying some of those, like health sciences, health studies, that makes a bit more sense to me, but I love the shift to engineering, and I think, yeah, it's very, very interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, another question, more details about the pre and post surveys. So how long are they, and can you share more about the types of questions that are included?
I'm trying to improve upon this, right? So there's people that are, experts in how we collect data and how we use it. And hopefully we can do a bit more of that. This was really me giving a QR code at the end of a workshop. So it's all done anonymously through a QR code. So it's not connected to their email, and they do it while after the session while still there. So I make it short enough that it can be done from their phone in less than 5 minutes. And so a couple, quantitative, like on a scale to 1 to 5, did you feel this related to what you were learning? Did you feel it was valuable, or do you feel like you know where there are more supports and resources? Do you understand the intersections of sexual violence and ways to prevent it? A couple of those over the last 2 years have changed. And then qualitative, what was the most impactful thing that you learned? And is there something you wanted more of, or any other comments? And so, and you don't have to fill out those two portions, but I've had such like over 90% completion rate because of that. Um, and because I say it's really valuable, like we're using this, and that's exciting for students too. Like this isn't being done at any other universities that I've heard of. I mean, I've researched forever on this and talked, but not like this, not treating it as a wicked problem, not embedding it this intentionally into classrooms with professors, not using design thinking. So they're excited because they're part of something that feels innovative and new and like we could develop something together.
Great, thank you. Shifting away slightly from the logistics of the program
Yeah.
design, there's a question about how do you approach different cultures and cultural contexts in our international student community? This person can see this being really good for incoming graduate cohorts.
Yeah, it's really, I've also done workshops for English learners in the school here. And so there's so many different cultural and geopolitical understandings. But I think there's some truths that can hold valuable in whatever way. One is that we're all impacted by sexual and gender-based violence, whether we've experienced it or not. And so it, you know, because I'm relating it to what they're learning, like the subject matter, that's what can unite them, right? It doesn't make it, I'll always have students saying, oh my God, in my culture, I didn't this. One thing that really resonates with a lot of women, but also a lot of men, is how we talk about how traditionally and historically women aren't taught to be able to say no. And we're very much taught to not make anyone uncomfortable. And, I give examples of my kids and how, when my daughter was little, it probably still happens now. What a pain she is. No, she's great. But I'll be like, hi. And I go in with an expectation of a hug. And she says, no, I don't want to hug you. And it's in a park. And I get, embarrassed in front of the other moms because they're going to think I'm a bad mother. But the part that I work on is that I want her to be able to say no without getting in trouble. I don't want her to have to go at a family gathering and I say, no, no, hug Uncle so and so and Auntie so and like override your bodily autonomy. So I have to figure out my own feelings, that I was already going in with the impression there was going to be a yes to that hug. And how do I deal with the rejection? And how hard it is for many people to say no. And that really plays into consent. And so people relate around that. I think there can at times be huge different areas of cultural understandings, but there's some truths in whatever way we want to, everyone gets to figure out their boundaries of it. It's not saying this is the only way. It's just saying, how can we prevent more? How can we take this point of what we're learning, of this thing of looking at microscopes, or how we're doing, rape kits. Like we have to use biology. We have to use these different points, or climate change. And so it opens it up for people in a bigger way. So my
Great, thank
answer
you
of
so
how I
much.
do with cultural stuff, as best I can. And I situate myself very much of going, this was my experience as a white, cis, straight presenting woman with a lot of privilege. And so I really also situate myself very clearly in terms of really understanding a lot of the privileges that I've had. And then I talk about some of the experiences I've had and say, so let's look at these other intersections where we know that there's racism within policing, in healthcare systems, in education. We know there's sexism and transphobia and homophobia, and all of these things are going to compound how people experience sexual violence.
Absolutely, thank you. So there's another question. Are there any trends in gender-based sexual violence that you see in sport that could apply to Queen's athletics and our student athlete leadership training, like team culture?
I think there's a lot of good work that's going on in sport. I think I think generally with education around sexual violence is if we keep on viewing it as this add-in, like, okay, now I have to sit through the seminar and do the checkbox so that I'm compliant with our whatever, that's not going to engage people. And you might get a couple, but it becomes this compliance thing. If it becomes this is going to help you in the sport, right? If it's going to help you go towards your goal. And when I talk about it with those classes, it's not just like, oh, you're going to do a good thing. It's like, if you develop something, this is costing billions and billions and billions of dollars every year to government. It's also causing immense amount of harm, but also in businesses, they're losing money every time there's sexual harassment claims in athletics, right? The problem we see with big sport or any of this. So this is going to help your team. Like, I think we have to stop viewing it as do this so that you're not a crummy person or you can intervene better, but that this is actually tied in with what you're doing. I don't know if that's a trend. It's what I think we should do. I think the trend is, and when I talk to other people in my position, in my job at post-secondary, is there's been a void of research in the last 10 years of showing what actually works in terms of prevention. So the methodology is still, I'm going to hand out some pamphlets and try to get people more aware and engage them, and partially because of supports and all those things. But I think we need to, it's important to also have government support of saying this is a priority so that we have people that are paid well, which doesn't happen in this field, to be able to do this work and have secure jobs. Job insecurity is rampant. Most people completely leave this field. No one starts in this work because they're like, this is going to get me some prestige and a really good job and a really good paycheck. So I think it's from all the levels. And then how do we relate it? Like, I truly believe that if you're not experiencing sexual harassment and sexual violence and intimate partner violence and able to communicate better and having all of these things, that's going to help you in athletics. But that's just me.
That's great. Thank you. Okay, another question around some of the program logistics. So in terms of expanding and formalizing the program, have you thought about doing a train the trainer type model so more folks can facilitate?
Yeah, yes, this is not a thing. I would like to see and study this and see how we can build this. I think right now is a really good time to be able to write and say, okay, what is this actually doing for students? And then how can we get other people? Because it is very specialized in how I've been able to build it. So absolutely.
Wonderful. Thank you. So we have another comment and a question. So Meredith says, thank you so much for your work and your engaging talk, Rebecca. Her question is, could you imagine a parallel education program that addresses the impacts of sexual violence in your talk? You mentioned shame being a predominant emotion that survivors report. Is there a way for this format to work to decenter the shame, to place it where it should rest, and empower survivors and the people who care for them to seek support, to offer support, and to promote thriving?
The goals of the program and what I do always are kind of 2 to 3-fold. One is by talking about this in real ways and I always talk about the shame that survivors feel. I've worked at the sexual assault center supporting survivors, and I support survivors here and worked on things. I've never met a survivor who hasn't felt an element of shame, no matter what they've experienced. And, there's been some big cases and I won't go into details, but a very famous case recently with an older woman who said, she made herself public to say, I want shame to change sides. And by talking about what actually causes sexual violence, that power and control and dehumanization, and how our structures allow it to continue in systems, I hope that eradicates shame. I think getting rid of that is part of it, and having better supports for survivors, knowing where to go, but also making sure that they are anti-racist and inclusive and understanding non-binary identities, and all of these aspects are essential. But the goal of the program is one, to have students now know where to go if something happens, know supports, get more education. Two, to hopefully have a bit of a culture change that, right now being able to intervene or say something and be like, yeah, this is building the structure. And then the other big thing is maybe change, become a leader. Like a lot of the students I know, I'm going to be talking to people who are going to be, paid way more than me with a lot more power in the future. And I'm hoping that somewhere in their leadership or what they're coming up with is going to help in design. And so, yeah, eradicating shame is one of my biggest goals in this work and whatever work I do. But yeah, I think there's so many different ways to expand this and build upon it in different ways.
Wonderful, thank you. We have a couple more questions. So, what's
This
your
is so great.
strategy?
I'm sure people's lunches are over, but I'm here. I'm here for it. I'll keep drinking some coffee, and I wish I could see all of your faces.
So, the next question is, what's your strategy to discuss being an active bystander as an intersectional and marginalized individual, especially from the power position point of view?
So I don't teach the bystander point. So we have that program and it's great, but especially in bystander, it's always about what's safe for you, like not putting anyone else in danger. So I often, in all my workshops, I have, it's called like a sexual violence pyramid or a rape pyramid. It kind of shows how sexual violence is built upon these different structures of power and systems and is normalized. And so I think by really, like, everything that I talk about is around those systems and structures and intersectional and understanding who is privileged and who is profiled and discriminated against and where these systems fail consistently, and what that means. And so I think by pointing that out, it's in the way that I'm doing this, it doesn't become you have to do this. It becomes what can I think about or create, and hopefully why I'm going into spaces that have historically not had any of these conversations, right? If we're going into areas where, I ask them, like, how many people know what intersectionality is? And often, hardly, very few do. And so it really is a teaching around this too, to have more understandings of the impact that discrimination can have on different folks and how that impacts whether they're able to intervene in a situation safely, which is often not the case. I hope
Wonderful,
that
thank
answers.
you.
Yeah. But in the bystander too, it's also very much of, distract, delegate, and whatever you can do safely. And that might mean just, checking in on someone later on if that feels within your capacity. But again, my goal is that we stop putting the responsibility on these few people and spread it out in this way.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And I think that ties nicely into our last question that I'm going to let you interpret however you'd like your call to action. So, how can we help?
How can we help? If you're interested in, like, I want to figure out in my position, if you're at Queens, and you're here and want to know more, please reach out to me. But also, if you're outside of it and want to have a discussion, I want to use data and analysis and leadership from other brilliant people. Like, I don't know how to teach engineering or medicine or relating this. I'm not going to be able to solve how you fix how we're doing rape kits. I don't know how we can create better transportation that are safer for people, but I can present that problem. So if you're, feel free to reach out to me. But the call to action is, to not treat this as an inevitable epidemic, that we stop reacting and start, getting excited about what we can do that has meaning and that's real and engaged in who we are too, and with our own storytelling as a power. I know so many people in my position, and I ask all the time, I go, do you share stories from your life? And the answer is often not. One, because it's emotionally really taxing. Um, and two, because is it safe? How do we do that? But I think that without being who we are, like people can sense when you're not being authentic, when it becomes just a checklist for you. And so by positioning ourselves and understanding our own areas of power and privilege in the work, and also our own areas of blindness and what we can learn from other people, which constantly happens with me, um, that's where some really like powerful learning and transformational change can happen. And as I say, I'm not paid enough to not do good work. Like the meaning in it, it has to be, I want to do something meaningful. otherwise, otherwise it's not, you know, I wouldn't be doing this work.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Rebecca, for your time and for such a great presentation. And thank you to the audience for all your wonderful
Yeah, thank you.
questions. I'm going to pass things over to Jaden Chong from the RIPV Story team for a quick update. Over to you, Jaden.
Thanks, Christy, and thank you so much, Rebecca, for the amazing talk. I'm just going to quickly share my screen. Okay, so hi everyone, my name is Jaden and I'm a member of our IPV Story. I just wanted to take some time to quickly introduce our initiative and let you know about our upcoming event. So, our IPV Story is a collaborative platform working towards advancing intimate partner violence research. And so, this platform seeks to create spaces for people with lived experiences to feel empowered to share their stories. We combine digital media and design approaches to improve knowledge translation and implementation. And we are doing this by taking a multimodal approach with social media, online events, and an in-person symposium that I would like to invite you all to. Join us on Sunday, August 17th, for our event, Storytelling for Change, a community event. This event will take place from 12 p.m. to 6 p.m. and will be held at a banquet hall in Vaughan, Ontario. This free in-person event will discuss how partnering with survivors of intimate partner violence can drive transformative research. So during this event, there will be opportunities to connect with people with lived experiences, researchers in the field, and intimate partner violence community members and organizations. There will also be talks from guest speakers, and there will also be some art and entertainment. So if you are interested in attending, we encourage you to scan this QR code here, which will direct you to our registration link. Prior to the registration, you will be asked to provide a unique code. So you can use the code storytelling for registration. And we also encourage you to share this event with your networks. And if they are interested, and if there are any organizations with groups of people who would like to attend, they can connect with us at connect@ripvstory.com. And if you have any questions, feel free to connect with us there as well. And then just finally, we just wanted to let you know that we are posting regularly on our social media, which just include Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. And so you can follow us on our socials to see posts regarding information about intimate partner violence, researchers in the field, stories from survivors, and as well stay up to date with upcoming events. So thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you at our in-person event on August 17th.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jaden. We'll wrap things up here. So the recording and slides will be available post-event on the Waypoint Research Institute website. These will also be emailed out to you. And again, we ask that you complete that post-event survey. We do appreciate your feedback. It helps inform our future offerings. And if you would like an attendance certificate, that is available. So please send me an email. It's kallen@waypointcenter.ca, and I'll happily send your certificate your way. And lastly, this is our last talk for the spring series of Waypoint Talks. We're really excited that we are hosting Inspire 2025 at the beginning of June, resuming our annual research conference. So please scan the QR code if you'd like to learn more, and we hope to see some of you very soon in June. Thank you so much and have a great rest of your day.